Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 5th, 2021 virtual special board meeting to conduct Facilities Committee business. I'd like to call this meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. I'd like to report, we will report on executive sessions at our regular business meeting at the end of the month. And from there, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Batchelor. Do you have any superintendent comments tonight, Mr. Batchelor?
No, just say Happy New Year. It's good to see everyone. And thank you for having this special meeting tonight for the focus on our accessibility and wellness infrastructure project at the high school. So thank you all for making this happen tonight.
Great. So we're going to get underway with our presentation. And just as a point of information for the public, tonight is advertised as a special board meeting. So we will have public comment. The way that public comment works is that we take public comment before we entertain any motions of business. And since tonight we will be taking no motions of business, we're just having a presentation, we will get right underway with that presentation. I'm going to turn the agenda over to Ms. Dunn, Chair of the Facilities Committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Solomon. Thank you, Mrs. Stern. I was just thinking I needed to thank Mrs. Solomon. Briefly, I hope you'll indulge me. Mrs. Solomon has stepped down as Vice Chair of the Facilities Committee, and Mrs. Monahan has joined me to run the committee. And she deserves a special thank you because we had a late night Saturday night working on some of the matters for this meeting. So I appreciate her stepping right up to do that work. This evening we have Steve Behrens from the Breslin Architect Group and James Miller from Fidavia with us. They want to talk to us about going out to bid for the infrastructure project at the high school. There's not actually any action to be taken tonight. We're going to ask the board to approve going out to bid in our next special facilities meeting of the board on January 19th. This is just an evening for you to ask your questions and think about things before the next meeting if you have other questions, so that you have plenty of time to consider the issue given the size of and scope of the project. Mr. Dolan?
Well, before I turn it over to Steve Behrens and to James, there's one member that would have been with us tonight, Hugh Cadzo from ELA. He is not with us because he is virtually over at Radnor Township right now at their Board of Commissioners meeting, and he's presenting our project for preliminary and final land development approval. So we started that meeting last night. They had some technical difficulties and they postponed it to now. So he was not able to join us. We have every confidence that he's representing the project wonderfully. And we may join him there later because he's a little later on the agenda, but he sends his, his regards. I also just want to thank our steering committee because our steering committee has just been working so diligently and passionately since I've started here, and certainly since we last had a vote of action on this project. We've met almost every 2 weeks, and so that was back in the summer. They've continued to work and develop this project. So thank you to the steering committee. Tonight's presentation is just an update, as we've already said. Our design team is at the conclusion of construction documents right now, and then we're preparing to go out to bid. So this evening we'll highlight the results of our construction estimating, and then following this, we'll have a follow-up meeting on the 19th to recommend to the board that they authorize the administration to advertise to go out to bid. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and thank him in advance for his time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. I'm going to share my screen. Play here. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. It is, as Bill alluded to, we're getting to the completion of the construction document phase, the last phase that you authorized back in August. And it's pretty exciting to see it coming to this point and coming together. So it's been a big team. I'm representing, probably 18 or 20 people on the design and engineering side that have really been working very diligently on this. And so very proud of what they've accomplished. And we're excited to be coming to you tonight to address this next milestone, which is ultimately to recommend to go out to bid for the project. So important to your understanding and decision making is, of course, the construction budget. And so this slide is here to, at a high level, compare where we are now to where we were in the numbers that you've seen previously, starting really in February with the kickoff of schematic design, reaffirmed in August with the design development, and then in October you saw the design development estimate, which had our total project cost at 24.7 million. So this slide here is showing on the top line there the construction budget, and the second line is the other bucket, if you will. There's the hard cost of construction, and then there's the soft cost of all the fees and permits and costs and financing associated with making that construction happen. So the big story here is one of proportion and how dollars have moved around as information became available and the design has progressed. So starting back in February, there was an estimate of $18.2 million for construction. And then we had a soft cost bucket of $6.5 million. Within that was a substantial contingency that would be associated with design, and in other words, decisions that as the design team and the administration, the school district and the board dollars that as it developed could be moved into construction cost as questions were answered, geotechnical investigations, stormwater management, those sorts of things. And so those two numbers combined were our $24.7 million project budget. So the next column is where we are today in January of 2021. So the top line of the construction budget has grown to accept some of those project contingency dollars that through, as I note there, through decisions that were made with respect to stormwater management solutions, adding some pieces to the project that were value adds. Some of that had to do with additional ADA infrastructure or HVAC efficiency decisions. And then also, you'll recall back in October, we reviewed the Spirit Gallery, and the board voted to increase the project budget by $390 to accommodate that. And then so all told, an additional $1.6 million of that those contingency dollars were moved into the construction budget that represents potential change orders or decisions that have to be made in the field during construction. And so that's in that $21.6 million. The remaining soft cost of $3.5 million is a much smaller contingency that remains for soft cost, fees, permits, financing, those sorts of things. But the vast majority of the construction related contingency is moved into that top line. So again, the right-hand column representing where we are now totals up at the bottom at $25.1 million. And if you do the quick math in your head, you can see the difference between those two numbers at the bottom are that $390,000 that was approved for the Spirit Gallery. So that's a quick synopsis of that, keeping it high level to allow for some questions as needed. With respect to the decision before you in 2 weeks, consistent with how we've presented these milestones in the past to you, the approval that we're going to recommend and be seeking would be one of initiating the bidding phase. And so the bidding phase is a very small slice of the overall project. For example, as the architect and the engineers, it represents 5% of our fee. And so the authorization that would occur would, in dollar terms, be an authorization of about $95,000 estimated for the bidding phase. So you'll see that's a much smaller number, if you recall, than what we showed you at design development to move into construction documents, which represents 40% of the effort. So that's the dollars associated with the authorization. Again, you see zeros there at the top of the slide because we're not asking in 2 weeks to approve any construction dollars. It's simply to go out to bid to have the contractors bid the project, and then be able to present those to you. So to that end, with this next slide, I'll turn it over to James to go through the dashboard and talk about next steps, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and Happy New Year to everyone. This is a document, what you have in front of you is a document that we've been utilising throughout the whole process with the steering committee, and it's just helped us progress through the whole process. The key I want to just emphasise here is just the section in the middle, which is just showing where the next steps are. Once we are coming out to come to you, then 2 weeks time to get move to with your permission to move forward with getting the building contract and bids out onto the street, and then over the next month we'll be doing the bidding, we'll be doing the pre-construction, etc. Pre-bid meeting, as well as getting the bids back at the end of February, and then we'll be going into that'll be when we will be looking to come to you at the end of February to actually do the actual bid and review the bids with you, and hopefully award some contracts. And that will be when in March we'll be going out, getting the contracts arranged, and then moving into the project in April.
Thanks, James. Bill?
I was just going to say, and so there's a lot on this particular slide, but really the focus, James, is that light blue line that's just illustrating where we are in the timeline. And this is a document that we use in the steering committee every other week, so it's fluid, it changes, and the focus really is just where are we in the timeline here. So that is that short window that Steve mentioned. That's all I had to comment on.
Sure. Maybe two other items of status are worth reporting. One is, as we mentioned, the project is to the point of seeking Board of Commissioner approval at the township level. That's where Hugh is tonight. And the other is represented there on James' dashboard with the code review. We just in the past day or so received the preliminary code review back from the township, from their third-party inspectors, and have a positive reaction from them. So that would position us well to then be seeking the building permit in a timely manner because they've seen the drawings already. And so that, in conjunction with the land development process moving forward smoothly as it has, we feel that by the end of the bid period, we'll be in good position to have our authorizations in place to begin construction.
I just want to make a quick mention, lest there be board members who are looking closely at numbers, that the board approved project budget doesn't include the Spirit Gallery on this slide, and it doesn't reflect the reallocation of the contingency. So if you're wondering which set of numbers to follow, it was the original slide that Mr. Behrens shared.
Okay, great. So that was a lot of information in a quick time, but we're here to answer your questions and also to be prepared to maybe prepare more for the next meeting as you may desire. So if this is sufficient information or if there's more detail on anything that we presented, that you need moving forward, please let us know.
Steve, if nobody's raising a hand quickly, one thing that I would appreciate, and then I got you, Susan, under the description of things that have been added into the construction cost, there were a couple items that said the steering committee approved. Really, the steering committee said, yeah, that makes sense. We don't have approval authority, but I wanted to make sure that the board understands what those items were. So if you want to give a little bit of a better description, I'm not sure everyone, I apologize, I don't remember if you've all heard about the stormwater management project. There was a lot of evolution in that piece. And that was really important to getting the approvals we need from the township. So that one especially, I was hoping you would explain. And I know Hugh probably could do that best, but he's not here, so
Yeah,
I'm calling on you.
He's explaining it elsewhere, but I will, if you don't mind, I'll share again here, and I can bring up a drawing just for a little bit of reference. So this is the site plan of the project. So originally, and I'll speak, Mrs. Dunn, to the use of the term approval was really not simply one of the natural progression of the design. In other words, things that we did not believe affected dollars or schedule, but are those things that add value to the project. And the steering committee has been fantastic in their diligence in asking us questions, seeking justification for the things that we come to them with. So it's all been a very regular and deliberate process in that regard. So what I'll point out here is early on, we had talked about the potential for surface detention basin of water. All the stormwater that comes off of the site needs to be detained for a period of time to control volume and the rate of discharge of those storm surges into the local watershed, which, as you probably can imagine, is the creek that runs most immediately, is the creek that runs along a side of Enke Field there. So the water's obviously coming that direction. We had a surface basin shown originally. And then Hugh and Liz and the other engineers that were looking at it presented the idea of, since we were replacing the turf on Prevost Field anyway, and all that removal and excavation that was associated with that, let's put the stormwater management system underneath that field. Actually gets it uphill a little better above the water table, which was good. But it also preserves the valuable real estate that is at such a premium over on that side of the site. So yes, there was a net increase to the construction cost associated with that decision. However, it again fell within the project contingency. Those things, those are the kinds of decisions we anticipated having to make during the process. So contingency dollars were available for that. So it didn't require coming back to the board asking for more money. It was a value add process that your representatives on the steering committee could hear and affirm as a good value add to the project. Does that explain it?
I think so. And of course, you'll make sure that maintenance of that system or any kind of review of it gets put onto our feasibility study and projects plan over the next 20 years.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, there are, and this is a point of debate because there certainly is maintenance required for above ground basins as well. Sometimes things are more visible if there's a problem associated with those. So whereas if it's underground, it's out of sight, out of mind. So I don't know that it's really an additional cost as so much as it is a little bit extra diligence to remember to investigate and do those clean out operations. And Mr. Dolan was there to hear all that, asked good questions around that, because you have other systems similar to this in the district. And so it's nothing new per se, but it will require some just regular investigation.
Great.
Just if I could just jump in, I just want to say that often those meetings that both Bill and Steve have talked about, the steering committee meetings that are every other week, often they go 2 to 3 hours depending the topic. And I'm just so appreciative of the expertise among the board members, community members, and the administration that are on that steering committee. And as Steve mentioned, really forces, our architect, Steve, we appreciate all the work, but to justify and to explain, these different options and really push hard on what makes the most sense for the district. So this was one of those that I think was a great example of, the architect and our engineers coming together to provide us the options to look at what makes sense in the long run for the district as well when it comes to the stormwater. I think we're getting an option here that what we decided on that actually is looking much more to the future as well, and makes a lot more sense from some of the initial concerns we had. So I just wanted to thank that process of justifying and going through different options, and that committee process really has worked well to help us arrive where we are. So I want to thank everyone for that.
So I think I saw Mrs. Stern, you had a question? You're muted.
I do have a couple, but I wanted to echo, you guys are spending a tremendous amount of work, the steering committee and Mrs. Monahan and Mrs. Duffy, Dunn. I do have a question about the stormwater system. It's kind of twofold. One is, if you can never put too much water in the reactor, you can never have a big enough stormwater system in Radnor. That is absolutely that is probably the number one pressing issue here in Radnor Township, if I'm thinking about things other than education of children. So is the system itself, more than amply sized, because that is an issue. And then the other question I have, and it somewhat relates to the maintenance, is there any implication with it being underneath a turf field with the rubber crumb, the construction of a turf field? Is the rubber crumb going to, impact the system in a way that perhaps if it were over a turf field, it wouldn't have the same issues? And then the third thing is it only detention, or is it also infiltration? Now, Hugh may need to answer that, and I don't expect those answers tonight, but those are the kinds of things, I was wondering about with this system. The biggest thing being it really literally can't be too big, because there's such an issue all over the town, and the field behind that area, you speak about it being up above the water table. That water table is pretty high over there, and there are issues. Ideally, down the road, we could even potentially do something with loop field and take advantage of the stormwater system under Prevo, and do something with loop field, because I think loop field has issues. I think if Mr. Friel or Mrs. Kevgis were here, there's water issues all along that area. So, but really my biggest question as it relates to the maintenance of this system is, are you guys taking a good hard look at whether or not it being designed over the turf field will have any impact on the system itself?
Yeah, great questions. And this came along at a time when we were having storm after storm after storm. And so we beat the heck out of this. There's on Hugh's ELA team, there's a young woman, Elizabeth Baldwin, who's just fantastic. She's just brilliant. And she ran calculations every which way on how to do this. And we were also up against the challenge, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, and I do wish Hugh was here to sort of back it up, but our original idea, because of how shallow it was, because of where it was in the creek bed, was becoming difficult to get the space we needed anyway. Those calculations were getting difficult. We also wanted to preserve the space in case we ever do want to develop that access road, which, you know, we explored early on. And then a third thing is, and you bring up Loop Field, which is a good point. There are actually 2 creek beds that are involved in the property. So you got runoff that you have to calculate for environmentally on both sides of the coin. And so for all those reasons, it almost became the only thing we could do. But to your point about maintenance and like the crumbs from the field, yeah, we've looked into that. We know that we have to be vigilant with it, but we also believe that we've oversized it a little bit, but probably more than a little bit, because we wanted to add as much capacity, get as much bang for our buck, and prepare for the future. So those are all good questions, but we certainly banged that around a lot before we arrived at this being. I even remember saying, "No, we can't do this. This isn't part of the original plan." And then it became, within a month, became very clear it was the only way to go.
Okay, because even the land, even the space where you're planning to put the field house, that area in and of itself is a really wet area. I mean, the whole area. Anyway, okay, good. So that was, has been on my mind about the project. And again, I think maybe Hugh or somebody could just be prepared to answer. This is not just detention, it's going to do infiltration as well. Okay.
Yes.
So,
I believe
there's just holding, there's holding water, and then there's infiltrating, which is actually better for the environment when you have a stormwater system that doesn't just hold water and slow it down from, flooding the stream, but when it's actually doing the work of infiltrating and improving the water quality of what is shedding off is a good thing. So that was that. The other question I have is more, I really appreciated the slide that you showed, kind of our progress to date of the breakdown. This next phase is going to cost us the 95,000. This is just as a point of information for the board. I think this will help. I know it will help me keep things straight. I don't know if, we'll have to let other board members see if they see value in this, but actually, if somebody could do a different page where you show us a tally of how we even got to the 1.5 million, the 1.4 million, that plus the 95 has us at 1.5. I like the running total at the bottom of that page, Bill, but I wish I see the other pages that got us to there must have been a 1.4 that plus 95 is bringing us to 1.5. So it would be helpful to see that just as we're moving through this. And that's really, that's just more a comment about that paperwork. Because this is a project that's been going on for a long time, I joked to someone a few minutes ago, remember back last February when this seemed like the biggest decision we would ever make as a board. And I long for those days. And that is not to make light of this. This is a huge community decision, but it's one I'm prepared to talk more about at the actual night of approval. So those were my questions. Thank you.
And it's a good point about the numbers. We weren't sure how much to break everything down, because James has broken things down into an incredible detail, which is fantastic, but we could get lost in the weeds a little with that too. So this is very helpful to know what.
I wouldn't say for presentation, it's additional material perhaps for the board to be able to review. I agree with you that getting into that level of detail in terms of the numbers tonight, and maybe not even necessarily that level, but it was nice information to see that might be helpful for board members to have that information, separately. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mrs. Solomon, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I want to make sure I have the information that we're talking about tonight. So the only document I can access that I am able with my technology skills is that one-page cost summary. We don't have access to anything else that you presented tonight, correct?
That is correct. We were sort of 11th hour with the other 2 slides, not sure whether they were helpful or not. So we put them in tonight at the 11th hour, and we can share those with you for sure.
Okay. So I just wanted to be sure I was looking at, because I couldn't read everything that you presented on the screen share. But so I guess I'm curious, it's been a while. what was discussed at these long steering committee meetings? That has anything changed that we should know about? I mean, other than this water retention, what were the other topics discussed?
Well, each meeting would have a different focus, but sometimes it was fencing and security. And as you drill out this last phase, when you're in construction documents, I mean, Steve, you could, and James too, because he's been through every page of this. I don't know how many pages we were at in August versus now, but it's developed so much. So when you get to that level of detail, and we've walked the buildings with some of the engineers, there's a lot of questions. We would bring back anything that we felt had a decision to be made and bring that back to the steering committee. So it could be anything from fences, or how to control traffic, or what are we going to do with security cameras and lighting, or sound. We met with Scott Hand and went through a lot of technology issues. So layers upon layers of different details we would kind of chunk out and look at from meeting to meeting.
I mean, Lydia, we had one meeting where we probably talked for an hour about how people get from the upper parking lot down to Enki. And do they come down over the hill? And should we put in stairs? Do we make everybody go around? No, people are still going to come down over the hill. Do we put in a crosswalk? Do we not? We had very, very detailed conversations, and everybody's different experiences of a setting, and weighing in from the, our experts about, well, you're never going to get approval for that. Or actually, when you do something like that, you set traffic wrong and you have all these other problems. So we did a lot of really granular work that the board doesn't want to have to do, nor do we have the patience, and we wouldn't get anything else done if the board were doing that work. That's the kind of things that were done at the steering committee level. It was, where should we mark out seating for, disabled seating? Should it be, at the top here? Is it down here? What kind of, do you put fencing in front of them? Do you put plexiglass in front of them? Do you put plexiglass everywhere? Those kinds of things. What's the best view sight line here? A lot of really detailed conversations about the experience of the person who's going to be on the ground at the site.
Are there detailed notes of these steering committee meetings? Because what I'm getting at is, I feel like we've gone from, honestly, most beautiful visual presentation. I don't feel like I know any of those details, and maybe everything was discussed, but I don't know that. Like, what's the thing Sarah was mentioning, I never thought of,
I'd like to join you in that, Lydia.
It would be useful to me to see, what topics were looked at. And I don't want to get into the details of it. I want to just know that somebody looked at all of those things, or what was discussed, or, and even, if there were notes of it, like what ideas were thrown out versus what ideas, went forward. That would just be more comforting to me to know what things were batted around. And I know it's been going on for a long time, but there must be agendas to these meetings, or meeting notes that somebody's got. That it would, I don't want to look at 500 pages of notes, but it would be really useful to me to see what topics you batted around,
If I may, I agree. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Lydia, but I think just a report, some kind of reporting or some kind of information sharing. Obviously, we don't want to get into the weeds about granular discussions about this and that, but I have to say, I kind of agree. Like, I feel like we've made some progress, which is wonderful, but it's been a long time since we talked about this as a group, and it'd be interesting just to know a little bit more about what's come out of the steering committee work.
So could I offer a suggestion, only because this is kind of, and Mr. Batchelor weigh in, but it's reminding me of, as we went through the very long process of the understanding the adolescent sleep needs. I have no desire to read notes from their steering committee meetings, but I do think what I'm hearing you say is, maybe a very high level executive summary of hey, I mean, Sarah's kind of mentioned it. One meeting, and Mr. Dolan and Mr. Barron's, they spent 1 3-hour meeting simply talking about the stormwater system. And it's clear from the discussion and from what's being brought forward to us, at least it's clear to me, that although at one point they started with thinking they were going to do a surface detention basin, that 3-hour meeting evolved into, no, let's look at designing something that's going to go under Prevost Field and be detention and infiltration and oversize it. I mean, all the different things so there was a 3 or maybe several meetings that resulted in that one recommendation. I think what I'm hearing is that the steering committee, and I know this because you're saying it, all of you who serve on it, is that you might spend a number of hours talking about those very turning and twisting and listening to every perspective about all sorts of options, about something as simple as where to place a set of stairs from upper lot to, down to the field. And it resulted in one recommendation that our board is considering, or that we're seeing in the design element. And so maybe there's a very high level executive summary that, periodically, Mr. Batchelor, I feel like we used to get just a very high level from you on the kind of things that the committee who worked on the adolescent sleep, the kinds of things that they were considering that ultimately led to the recommendations that they made. So I would hate to have this turn into, let's see the minutes of and hear a recap of every meeting, but more at the executive summary level of the kinds of things they considered. Does that sound accurate, Andrew and Lydia?
Yeah. Yes.
No, I think I want more detail than a high-level executive summary. I actually would like to know, because I'll tell you what I'm hung up on, and you guys know this. I think that this project, which started with something that a lot of us, I care deeply about, which was making our facility accessible and ADA compliant, turned into, to me, a lot of other stuff was thrown in there. And I know I'm an outlier to many people on that, but so one question I still have, there's 7 classrooms in this design.
No.
And nobody's really answered what we're doing with those, or at least that's my knowledge of what has become of that, like what is the plan for that space? It's just like your closet space. You expand to the closet space that you have. We all do. So we'll use those classrooms, but why are we building them? Like, there's things like that in there that, I think that I've felt from the beginning, and that's why I wanted to see what everything was that was discussed, because I still felt this is a huge financial expenditure. And I understand that you're going to finance it in a way that, is very smart and savvy. But I still think that there were a lot of things thrown in this that were want-to-haves, not have-to-haves, to meet ADA compliance. And so I would like to know, what are we doing with those classrooms? Why do we have them? And maybe it's just that there's been so much time. Maybe that was mentioned a year ago, but there's things like that I don't remember the answers to. And it would be helpful to me to say, oh, well, the steering committee discussed these topics, 9 months ago.
Just to clarify, there aren't 7 classrooms. At one point, you're thinking of a very, very early project plan where there was talk of moving the maintenance team out of their space and turning all of that into classrooms. That went away when we took away the access road and the parking lots. I mean, if you think about it, there were actually a lot of other pieces to this project that we've gradually peeled off and said, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. So I understand where you see there's been growth, but we've actually consolidated and focused on, I think, what a majority of the board would say we really need. And I think we've done that with a lot of community input as well. So there are 3 classrooms going in, and they are going in the fitness wing, but they can be used for other purposes. They don't have to be gym classrooms. They aren't specifically designed that way necessarily. And the other things, I mean, we can get you notes. I can share you the notebook that I kept very, very diligent notes at the beginning, and sometimes they trail off. And I'm sure Mr. Miller he has a team member who keeps minutes from all of our meetings, and there are agendas to all of our meetings. But I mean, the detail that we get into in some of these meetings is literally, you know, Breslin came to us with a beautiful drawing for expanding all the walkways around the tennis courts and adding seating and all. And we looked at it and we said, well, is this really the best use of the money? And is this the best access point? And the steering committee actually pared it all back and said, you know, we do want something, but we think you can do this, that, and the other. And this will be sufficient, and actually a huge upgrade from what we've got, because it will be ADA access. We literally talked about where stairs should go, and will tennis balls get caught in there? And are you putting in stairs and therefore making things less welcoming to your ADA community? We talked ad nauseum about heights of fences and where gates go and whether they should be locked, and you know what other communities are doing and how other new facilities have been built, and which townships have what height fences around their buildings. So you are welcome to the minutes. I'm not sure everybody else.
Well, I
will
mean,
read
with
them.
all due respect, Sarah, we've brought up things, you know, that I hadn't thought of. You know, it makes me feel much better that somebody's looking at how high the fence is and who's able to see what from different positions. But those are just, you know, with all due respect, you're anecdotally grabbing things that you remember. I'm sure there's much more to
There
this.
is. I'm not.
And I'm not willing to vote for a project of this magnitude. I need to see, you know, what everybody's batted around and looked at. And I'm sorry if I don't remember what happened.
No, you don't have to
A
apologize.
lot happened since then. And so
Absolutely.
in my mind, you know, there's still things that aren't answered that, you know, and I just think that it's due diligence to the community that we, all of us, not, you know, the steering committee, you know, they have, let's be honest, the people on the steering committee have a decided point of view. And, you know, that may or may not be what the whole community wants.
Lydia, to be clear, the board has already voted on the project.
I understand that.
So let me finish. The board has already voted on the project. What we will consider for a vote in a few weeks is going out to bid. And then which, as Mr. Breslin, Behrens and Bill and Mr. Miller all pointed out, actually as a percentage of this project is virtually nothing, that getting us to that stage. And then when the bids come back in, our board will have yet another, I'm sure, robust discussion and decision-making point. So
well, it's a big project, and a lot's happened between the last time we talked about it, Susan.
I understand.
I don't know if everyone else on the board remembers all of this, but I do not remember, you know, my details. And so it would be really useful to me to just have, you know, some backup on what else was discussed.
And Mrs. Solomon, I think it's wonderful that you're asking for it this far in advance as opposed to the night we're trying to vote. So I appreciate that. And Mr. Dole, I'm sure, can put together a great package for you. And if there are other board members who want to read all that material, you know, we can certainly make it available. And look, some of this is a COVID issue, right? And different times we might have been able to bring big sheets of paper, or we talked about this in the steering committee, 2 meetings, and you would have been able to look through it. But we have members of the steering committee who've done that. We've actually, you know, had COVID safe days where we've met on site to really walk things that we just couldn't quite visualize. So I wasn't just picking anecdotes out of the air. I can go on all evening. I don't want to bore people with all the things we've talked about. I think that some people want to trust that members of the steering committee are involved in this. And Lydia, trust me when I say there has been more than one occasion, and you will see head nods, where Mrs. Monahan and I have said, absolutely not. We are not going back to the board. We are not going to, with a straight face, ask any board member for money for that. So figure out another solution. We have absolutely done that. We are very aware of the expenses that are involved in this project and what looks like a glory project versus, you know, something that's genuinely needed. And we're very mindful of that. So I understand that you think that this is, you know, something that people had a specific mindset towards. my kids aren't big athletes. This is not, I don't have sons playing football, Lydia. This is something I genuinely think is meaningful to the community. So I will happily get you all the materials you need to review it. And you're welcome to, I'll bring you my notebook. If you want to look at my notes on things, I'm happy to share that with you, but you can get the official meeting minutes as well.
Yeah,
I think
this is
that's
why,
fine.
yeah, and this is why we do two meetings. This is why whenever people ask me and said, "What, Ken, why are we doing this over two meetings?" This is why we're doing it over two meetings. So this is great. These are great questions, and what we can do is we can provide for board members all of the agendas and the minutes from the steering committee meetings. That is not a problem, and we'll get that out to board members, and those who want to review it can review it. And I think we're also suffering from right now, and I say suffering, we're all, it is the reality of that, as board members, there is so much information thrown at you on a Tuesday night. And we're at a point right now where the design has not changed. You approved the design, and that design, and Steve, if I could have a dialogue with you for a minute, essentially our design that we approved is that same design. But what Steve has had to do now is create the layers and layers and layers of all the drawings, and where is the fiber optic line and the pipes and the electrical and all these details, that then all these details raised questions. It didn't raise questions that maybe dramatically change the design. The stormwater is one, though, where it just changed it from one location to under the field. But the design itself, so we really should have started this meeting with doing that 3D view again and looking at that design again, and because that hasn't changed, dramatically. Is that a fair statement, Steve?
It is, absolutely. And yeah, and so
Yeah, and let me keep going, and and just say, so what we can do is the now mechanical, the more detailed drawings for those board members who want to see those, we can make those available in the district office in a conference room, and the next 2 weeks people could come in and feel free to thumb through them. Would that make sense to you, Steve? Is that okay?
Absolutely. And as is mentioned, in other than COVID times, that would be happening.
Yeah.
Much more frequently. Yeah.
So we can make that happen, and Bill can be available. Look, I'm really good at giving out other people's time, but Bill we can make people available to try to meet, or with board members sign up if they want to come in and look at that. And the other piece too is what we got to realize too is the context for tonight. The context for tonight and for 2 weeks from now is not to, we're not discussing really again, we've already made approvals and decisions we've already made about size of project, what's in it, and all of that. What we are deciding now is the authority now to go out to bid and have a presentation tonight where our project, our construction management firm, which James Miller, James and Fidavia are representing our interests. And, we hired them to represent our interests. So Steve, as our architect, has put together and given us that estimate, and we saw what those numbers were February a year ago, of what those numbers are. And now James has now, between the last 2 months or so, have taken all those numbers from Steve, and Fidavia have now crunched those numbers and said, yes, here's where the numbers fall. Is that an accurate description of really what we're trying to see tonight? Is we have an architect who we've hired, who's put together numbers for us, and to see how they've adjusted and changed. And for the company we've hired as our construction management, Fidavia and James Miller, to say, yes, these are the right numbers, and we agree that here's the estimate on where these numbers are for us in preparing to go out to bid. Steve and James, is that a fair assessment of what we're really trying to do tonight and in 2 weeks?
Exactly. That's exactly what we're presenting.
So it's really that number piece, and for us as a board and a community to see that design we put together that we saw a year ago, and then for all these other pieces, where are we in a financial point? So these other pieces with what the committee has discussed, the actual detailed drawings, those schematics, we can have all those things available. I think that's very easy and good questions. And let's start 2 weeks from now. Let's do the 3D rendering. And Steve, in the next 2 weeks, if there's a few extra, nice songbirds or, people walking, or you want to add to the 3D to enhance it a little bit, but that we could start with that 3D drawing again. in the meantime, so people can see here's where the project is. And then other questions that board members have, over, that in the next 2 weeks, please, I mean, if not, ask them tonight, but other board members over the next 2 weeks, we can answer those questions as well.
Well, that would really help me because I think it occurred to me as you were talking, Mr. Batchelor, that the problem is that we haven't been able to see any of this. Like we're sitting in our dining rooms or wherever we are trying to imagine this. And so it would be really useful to me. I'm going to come in and see whatever you're able to present to us. And also what I mentioned earlier, to just know the topics, that people have batted around, people who know way more about this. And I would just feel so much better knowing the list of things, all the things that people batted around, and, that they did look at all these things. And so that would be really helpful.
And Lydia, there's still things being debated. We have drawings, with fences, all over the campus with this. And right now we have fences in there. I know one person who's, I think, very wise, person, and he's arguing hard for no fences. Some people think he's crazy for arguing hard for no fences. So there's still debates we're going to have about those things. I happen to be one of the non-fence people. But there are decisions we're going to have to make, and some of them we're going to wind up leaning on the guidance of administration. We're going to lean on the guidance of the architect, and some of those still aren't done. So the fences are there; they're in now, but we're really debating about some of the heights of some of those fences. Where should those fences all be, and what's the reasoning behind them if we're a 24-hour facility? I don't want to get into that debate tonight. We don't need to do that tonight, but it's an example.
You're opening that debate.
You can tell where I'm still campaigning. I'm in the minority.
Of course, that piqued my interest because I'm like, why are we having fences?
I'm in the minority. Well, we have them now, and I'm in the minority on it right now. But we don't need to decide
on your side.
we don't need to decide that now. But it is an example of things and discussions that will continue, though, as we're moving forward. But the good news is it's in the design right now. It could be something that we may, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks, may be able to adjust going forward. Just an example, though, of not everything is, there are some things that we still need to discuss. And this is where the steering committee has been helpful, because you have your AD on the steering committee, and he can give the practical insight to that. We also have the principal there. We have parents are there. We have band parents. We have others who can talk about how the facility is used. And that's helpful feedback for our architect in helping guide us on what really makes sense.
Yeah, and so that would be great to just know, I've seen the list of who's on the steering committee. I just feel very detached from where we were and, sort of
I
all
think
the loose ends.
I think the mistake we made tonight, and this is on me, tonight's is about money. We've already done the design discussions. We've already had the design, and the design is what it is, and we've decided that. I think that tonight's discussion was more about here's the dollars now, the estimate costs, and here how it comes out, and we need to be prepared to go out to bid. And here's the dollars we're discussing to go out to bid. So I think we could use a refresher on going back to design, because I don't think seeing all the new drawings where light bulbs and electricals will necessarily answer everybody's questions, but just going back and seeing what are the drawings again, I think is what would be helpful. Steve, does that make sense to you and Bill?
It does. Like on a practical matter, we're at construction documents ready, with the exception of some tweaking. But we've had the 40% documents and the 60% documents down at Mike Friel's office available to teachers, to PE, to coaches, throughout. So we could do something like that, where if it's more helpful to see the plans in the actual space, we can make them available there, or we can have them here at the admin building, or both. So that's easy enough done. And then, again, we can, it'd be difficult because you're going to look through, well, what do these electrical drawings mean? You don't need that level of detail, but I think it would really be helpful for folks to have access to those, just to see, can you show me where in this document we're looking at the handicap ramps, and then can we walk out and look at them? I think we can. I don't think we can make a whole day available for that for the whole group with social distancing, but we can certainly set it up so that, by appointment or by groups, we can make that happen. Would that be helpful?
Well, it could be helpful to, I think we offer a time, so we'll do that for the board. We'll definitely offer a time to see it, and we can decide, might be great to do it at the high school. But Steve, for, I want to just understand what the design looks like now compared to, as a board member, what I already approved. Now, you've done a whole lot of construction documents that are detailed that I have seen, but the actual, what we approved, the shape, the 3D rendering, the drawing that shows that, how much of that has changed from the last time the board has seen those drawings?
When, Mr. Bachelor, when you mentioned the animation, I was actually sitting here thinking as you were talking, what would change on that if we had to update it, quote unquote, for the final design? I can't come up with anything. The shape, the size, the scope. What might have changed is the use of materials or detailing and where a limestone trim occurred, where you might have seen face brick before, but very minor, those details of what I mean. I'm having a hard time thinking of what would have changed.
That's why I joked about maybe we could put one more bird in the picture or something. Or, but I think we should have, unfortunately, sorry, my computer just, we should have probably started with that just as a grounding for, and I apologize, board, for a grounding of, hey, this is where we are. This is what we've already approved. It is now the behind the scenes, what is behind the walls, what is under the floor, what is under the ground, quite literally, we have been working on. And these drawings, if you're interested. But all of those other pieces really are still the same. And we can get you the minutes from the meeting so you can see how some of those things resulted in, discussions with the steering committee. That's not a problem at all.
Right. I'm also sitting here thinking, how many pages of minutes would there be and agendas? You're probably between 150 and 200 pages. The set of drawings is about 2 inches thick at this point. And I think it would be very helpful for folks to see all that. And again, in a different time, I'm sympathizing because I just think of how differently this would flow in terms of having our meetings in person and me bringing that roll of drawings this big around and dropping them on the table. It's typically very different.
Well, ironically, and having been at those meetings in another district with projects and done it, I would tell you what really would be different is you'd bring it and you drop it on the table and we'd all kind of nod and look that it's there. The reality is some of that, we still, if there are, board member interest, it's coming back and seeing it separately. So we will offer the next 2 weeks for people who want to, go through that thick layer of designs that can come flip through. Please, that would be more than happy to offer that opportunity.
I'm going to tell you, 8 years on the planning commission, and I used to look at maybe the first 4 or 5 pages because it was existing conditions, grading, the new lines of the construction, the lighting designs, and all the detail sheets for stormwater management. I'm not an engineer. So my only request is that, and I appreciate all the offers, and Sarah, your offers for the minutes. If everybody could just let Ken know individually or raise your hand or whatever. I don't personally want the minutes printed. I know I won't read them, and I don't want to waste 150 pages for me, since I'm not going to read those. If you end up doing a 1 or 2 page executive summary, as Andrew, I don't know if you had more in line what Lydia was asking for or what I'm making suggestion of, like a high level executive, a good understanding of what the high topics were. I'm fine with having that. So just make sure you communicate whether or not you want those pages printed for individual edification. I think, just out of fairness to the amount of time it would take to print those.
Sure.
That would be my only request.
If you don't mind, before this goes too far downstream, I just want to kind of just reiterate what I said before, which is, in contrast to Lydia, and by the way, I think we're all, as board members, I think we're entitled to request this information. But in contrast, I don't have time or interest to get into the weeds. I've got lots of work to do outside of board work, and but I would like to know just what are some recent findings from the steering committee or discussions, some kind of summary, just to be kept up to date. That would be quite helpful. This is a side issue. This is beyond, but I'm actually surprised that isn't kind of a standing protocol of steering committees, that there are reports that are generated from steering committee meetings, or at least some kind of like periodic steering. If it's a large project like this, or large initiative where there are steering committees, I would think that would be a protocol or some kind of standard operating procedure. That could be.
I think we have been doing that. I mean, for the last year to 2 years, we've been at facilities committee meetings, updating the facilities committee, sometimes monthly, on what is the work that's been going on for the last year. So, I mean, that has been going on, and not only updating the facilities committee on what's been going on.
A written report. A written report has been drawn up.
No, I don't know. No, I don't know that
that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone in the administration taking the time to write a report that we can read, not expecting us to dip into meetings or whatever, but someone in the administration taking the time to go into the minutes and go into the weeds and write a report.
But hang on a second, Andrew, we would have to, I hear what you're saying, and that's maybe something we should discuss as a board.
Sure.
Because that's a pretty big, it's a bigger ask than maybe it appears on the surface. And how we've worked as a board thus far is, when we have district goals, which we've had district goals, it has become very customary over the last few years that we've had many special board meetings, committee of the whole meetings around our district priority projects. We had a number of meetings, public board meetings, where we got updates and information around the adolescent sleep needs study. Let me use that because I think it's a relevant example that's not around this particular decision. As we went through the process of the sleep study committee doing their work, we had periodic public meetings where we got updates, we got information, we asked questions. We never got a written report on that. And, that has been up till now the agreed upon way that our board has functioned. We've brought we didn't simply do meetings at just the curriculum committee when it was time to have an update about the sleep study. And in fact, Ken, I appreciate that you've mentioned that this has been discussed at the facilities committee meetings. Actually, in the last year, we've probably had more special board meetings around the facilities committee work than not. I think it's mostly been done as a committee of the whole. So it's, Andrew, I hear what you're saying. I hear your request, but that would be a change in how we've been approaching updates to the board around our district priority projects, of which this infrastructure project is clearly a really big one with lots of implications, financial and otherwise. So, that may be the thing for us to discuss. Is that something that we want?
I think for those of us who work, and for those of us who have lots on their plate, I think an executive summary on steering committees would be a wonderful thing to do. It's just an idea, I'm putting it out there.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Well, it's just, I also don't agree with your characterization of comparing this to what happened with the sleep study, because I felt like we did here are the 3 choices we're looking at, and we're, looking at having the middle school start at a different time, and maybe maybe flipping the elementary before the high school. We got all of that as it was progressing through the sleep study. I felt much more in touch with that. So with this, and I do think, in fairness to everyone here, this is really a result of COVID, of us being, separated and distracted. And this is why I didn't want to proceed on this project during COVID, because I anticipated feeling where I feel right now, which is, I haven't been in the high school in 10 months. And so it's very abstract now to sort of picture where we are. And I just need to get my head around, get back up to speed. And I sympathize with Andrew that, nobody wants to reinvent the wheel, and we don't want to be in the weeds, but I personally feel disconnected from this. So, and I think the things offered for me will do it for me, but, other.
Lydia, I fully agree with you. I think Sarah validated the same thing. And at the end of the day, we each process information differently. Those updates that you were talking about that you feel like maybe were different with this, those all happened prior to COVID because it brought us to a point of voting on this project prior to COVID. We voted on that, I think it was last February. So what the work that has proceeded since then, we had another meeting. We had a meeting in April. We had a meeting in August. I think we had a small update in October because we made a change. Much of that background that brought us to the point of voting on the project that, in fairness to you did not vote to support. And, that was your prerogative. But those updates did occur prior to us voting on the project in its entirety to even move forward. And I'm not saying that executive summaries aren't a good idea, and they may in fact be a very efficient way to do it. I'm just merely stating that would be a change from how we've been doing things. And that doesn't make it right or wrong.
I think because, and again, we don't need to argue this in this meeting, but I think that because of what's occurred this year and how the monumental amount of time we had to spend on opening schools and opening schools safely, this should be much lower on anyone's priority list than keeping kids safe at school. And so I'll own that as why I feel disconnected. I've been focused elsewhere. And so, it's just, for me, a lot on our plate. And this is why I wanted to table this project during COVID. But again, that was just me. So I'll try to get myself up to speed.
So for next week, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to provide the minutes of the meetings and the agendas from the meetings for those interested in looking at it. You don't have to. It's easy to produce. We will provide opportunities for board members to, if they want to come in and see things in detail, we'll provide those opportunities. We'll try to provide some type of executive summary of just where we are. I think as a board, we need to talk about, the reality is where we provide executive summaries is at our monthly committee meetings, or as we give updates is where we provide those summaries. But for this, between now and the next 2 weeks, we'll put together, executive summary summarizing, where we are now from the last time and the last meeting we had and where we are at this point. We can do that. So are there other questions moving forward?
I think Mrs. Goldman has been patiently waiting to ask a question for quite a while.
Thank you. I want to say one thing, that I make a few comments and then ask a couple questions. One is that I found that having these meetings online causes me to sort of be a little challenged in retaining information. So I think that the updates have been there, but one of the things I've discovered about the virtual experience is that it's harder sometimes to process information because it doesn't have a context to it like we do when we're in person. And, you remember you were sitting next to somebody, or the room was kind of cold or whatever. So part of this may be attributed to the fact that we have been getting information, but it's just more difficult to retain, I think, for some of us. Not everybody necessarily has this challenge. I know some of the things that maybe Lydia was struggling with, I can relate to. The second thing is that I want to point out that the sleep study, just for consistency's sake, and I believe the technology integration study, when those updates, the project progress was outlined on the website, there was a little bit more on that than there has been on the infrastructure project. So I noticed that, like, for progress updates on the infrastructure project, it says the steering committee met on April 18th. And then it goes on to a whole nother date. With sleep, with the school start time and technology, there was like a paragraph that really covered the main highlights of what happened in that steering committee meeting. And maybe not only for the board, but for the community, because if we're having trouble, some of us keeping up with what's going on, perhaps this isn't a bad idea to do it for the community as well, is to provide, and hopefully it's efficient, since you seem to be revisiting this with the board, is to put more of that paragraph high level, like the committee met and talked about X, Y, Z in a paragraph there, the way we've done with other studies. That's just an idea that might accomplish two things at the same time. The third thing, yeah.
So no, I thought Amy was talking. I just want to be careful of this narrative of comparing this to sleep. If we went back and looked, we've been at this for many years, more than the sleep. We did a feasibility study just on this project alone, where we looked at different options, and that opportunity did happen, where we looked at options and looked at things, and we went from a feasibility study with one architecture, one firm, to the hiring of an architect. There have been, I think it's just, this has been going on for a long time is the challenge. I just want to be careful with the comparisons to sleep, that, oh, we had options where we don't have options here. We've had a long time where we've had this. I think we're just almost forgetting where we are in this process, and it's hard. You're right. The website maybe being updated would help that, but it's also a very different process. So I just want to be careful of the narrative to somebody who's just tuning in, that they're not realizing. All the community meetings we've had, the community information sessions, all those different pieces that have been part of this. So there has been a very thoughtful process that has been very engaging with the community and the board. So I just want to be thoughtful about what people who are just tuning into this meeting are hearing as we move forward.
Yeah, and I'm maybe I didn't express myself clearly. I am saying pretty much the same thing. We've done a lot of the same kind of work on the infrastructure project that I recall us doing with other things, which is having community meetings, having full board meetings, having separate subcommittee meetings. And it was chronicled, those things have been chronicled in a little bit more detail on the website than we've done with the infrastructure project. So I was only offering that maybe if we going forward, chronicle, when somebody's updating stuff on the website. I've seen it, it goes all the way through the end of November. Every time the steering committee meets, somebody puts a note on the website. I'm looking straight at it. The last update, I think, was November 30th. So somebody's doing a good job of keeping the community informed of the progress of the project. But what's a little bit different with some of the other deep dives we've done is that it only says that the committee met, as opposed to what we've said before is we met, we talked about, ping pong tables and sidewalks and stairs, and then you move on, and then it goes on to December 30th. So that's all. It may not be a suggestion that has any value, but I just noticed that and thought maybe based on the feedback that I'm hearing, that could be something that helps both board members and community members keep up with this, because it is hard to keep up with, but it's no fault of what the process is. The process has been very thorough, and I recall, it going on. I've got a binder to attest to it. So there have been a lot of different meetings and all of that. I don't want to miscommunicate the fact that there has been a very thorough and detailed process, just like we do with everything else. My questions about what's on the agenda for tonight was, what is locker room energy recovery? That was something that was put on there, and I don't understand what that means. So maybe since it's on there, I could have missed that explanation. Maybe somebody could tell me what that is.
And then that's a good point. That was when I asked about the stormwater management. I was going to go to the others and I got sidetracked. So what was the other one though? Sorry.
Yeah, and then I was just trying to understand the move of because we are supposed to be looking, asking questions about the cost here. The decrease, it says under estimated soft costs, decrease includes a 3 million plus project contingency, and that was moved to the construction budget above, but then it says it's construction contingency and it's a different number. It's 1.6 million. So some
of that money was actually allocated for those expenses. So like the stormwater system wasn't in the original budget. So some of that contingency is being used for the stormwater management system. Does that make sense? So the contingency, the leftover money just sitting around, it has shrunk because we've allocated it to certain portions of the project that we've had to add.
So there was originally a $3 million contingency budget?
It was
And-
3.5 million originally.
Okay, so are all of it, except for the 1.6 has been appropriated to different parts of the project, or am I not understanding that?
There's 200 some thousand left, I believe, in the soft cost budget for contingency. Is that correct?
A little more, probably close to 300,000. right?
Okay, it was two something, but yeah, it might have been
Right,
close.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
So, yes, and these are subtle distinctions, I admit, so I understand the need to explain it. So maybe I should bring that slide back up if that would be helpful.
And then while you're looking at that one little thing where it says tennis court ADA access, is there something, I know that I've heard that there's nothing different, but why was that put there specifically?
So there's nothing different from the designs that you've seen, but the original project as proposed did not include any changes to the walkways to the tennis courts. And as we reviewed it, we felt it was unfair and unreasonable to fail to make access. At the time we were making changes to this footprint, it didn't make sense to leave out the tennis courts from ADA access. They blend neatly into the entry that's there, and it made sense to add in an appropriate walkway that would make them accessible.
So Sarah, is that, I mean, Mrs. Dunn, is that where part of the project contingency, is that where some of the project contingency money went to, is taking care of the tennis court ADA access that you
Yes.
discussed in the steering committee meeting or something,
Yes.
right? Am I putting the pieces together? Maybe it's just a function of how this, we didn't get it till right before the meeting, so maybe that's part of what
No,
the
I
struggle.
understand that.
You want to talk about the locker room and energy recovery? What is that?
Sure. These are a couple examples, as we're talking about here, of value adds that have been incorporated into the project. So a locker room by definition just exhausts a lot of air out. You create circulation of air through the locker rooms, and that air is just exhausted out, and then it's made up to normalize and balance through the HVAC system that's feeding the space. So our mechanical engineer identified the fact that we're doing some work associated with the units in that area, so they could add to that exhaust system what's called energy recovery. And what that does is that actually is machinery that would capture some of the heat that's being, because think of it in the wintertime, you're exhausting the conditioned warm air out of the space, and you're having to bring fresh air in and then heat it up. So what this energy recovery system does is actually take some of that heat off of the exhaust air and put it back into the intake stream of the supply air. So
Okay.
it's a net increase, but it's a small one, and it brings value to the project. And that's exactly what contingency is there for during the design process.
So that makes me also wonder about our discussion sometime, I do remember quite a few things about previous meetings, one of which was our emphasis on exploring green opportunities. And is the locker room energy recovery an example of something that satisfies the desire to take care of green initiatives? And how much of your work since we had that conversation has been focused at the steering committee level of thinking about green opportunities? And are they things that cost-wise and capability-wise you've been able to embrace, or at this point, because I'm not a construction expert, but I would imagine at this particular level, you would be appropriate to be looking a little bit more granularly at green stuff, right? So are you looking at green stuff at this point, and how's that going?
Yes, it's being done in an integrated fashion. So things like the energy recovery, things like we did a sun study to look at how the heat load might, and the expansive windows of the new fitness lab and looked at shading devices associated with that. We're introducing 100% LED lighting to the project. The plumbing system is designed to be low flow. There are several aspects of sustainability. Also the landscaping. Again, that's a piece that Hugh is particularly interested in as a landscape architect. So we're looking at sustainable landscaping, plant selections that are going to require less maintenance than others. We're not planting.
No, I realize that we're not here. I don't want to dive deep.
All those are
into
integrated.
that, because that's not what tonight is for. But because I asked about locker room energy recovery and learned what it is, it just made me wonder. And it was sort of, it should be more of a passing question, because I know we're focusing on costs tonight. But I do know that that green stuff can be more expensive, even though ultimately long-term it saves you money. So I was just wondering if, trying to look at these numbers and process them, if that's part of what we see in a little bit of an extra, actually, it went, a little bump up could be some of that. Trying to keep the year straight, February 2020, January 2021.
Right.
So the other thing, Steve and Mrs. Goldman, that we didn't list under here in the construction budget piece, but that did cost more. And again, it's not something that you would have seen in the design, but it will affect absolutely the usability of the system. Remember, is the exhaust system in the columns of the pool area that will hopefully pull off some of the chlorine gas off the top of the pool. Right. So there are a lot of things, I think Mr. Batchelor aptly apologized for this, but one of the reasons we didn't think it was necessary to show you the designs again was that the designs aren't significantly changing. What we've really delved into is a lot of systems issues and detail that improves the use of the system, of the space.
Got it. Thank you. My being able to ask those questions helped me better understand what's on this slide in preparation for our next meeting, when we're going to be asked to approve this. I just want to make sure I'm recapping sort of the mission of tonight, which is to really better understand what's on this slide, because it's going for approval at the business meeting. That right? No,
no, I think we're going to have another special meeting of the board to conduct facilities committee business on the 19th, and that's where we will ask for board approval to go out to bid, with the goal being to actually go out to bid. That meeting's on a Tuesday. I think the goal is to go out to bid on Thursday of that week, if possible.
Correct.
That's the goal.
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's not, as Susan mentioned, we've already, as a board, approved the total amount of construction. The amount of the construction cost is not for board review and approval on the 19th. It's just for the cost associated with going out to bid, which is $95,000 approximately. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
And we created that. I'm going to call it what this benchmark represents out of a request from the board this past summer. So we're showing how much it costs to move forward at this milestone. We wouldn't normally, if doing a project, I would say, Steve, ever done a project this way where we've created the milestone, where you've had to be this specific on how much each milestone costs? We did that because of COVID and because of the board expressed back in the summer, when are the off ramps, when are the on ramps and off ramps, really when are the off ramps? And we're trying to just show at every phase out of the request from the board, where are the off ramps. So when we take this next step, this is how much we are committing to based on the amount we already committed to. So we already committed to this large amount. We've already done that. So this is how much this is costing out of that whole number that we already approved to move forward with. Is that, Steve, a fair example?
Absolutely. And just one nuance to add to that is all of these numbers get proven by the bids. So right. And that's the point at which you say, we want to move ahead and spend $21 million. In other words, the argument can be made, we've gotten this far. How do we not find out what it really costs to know if we can move forward? It's sort of a a sunk cost analysis, if you will. So,
And I want to say I appreciate that chart very, very much. And I'm going to put that on the front page of my binder when you circulate the copies to us, because it does really help for those who are struggling to sort of recap where we've been over a multi-year project in the midst of COVID, which has taken our heads and put us into on another planet. It really is helpful. It's just that we don't have, when we have it, I think it'll be something that'll help refresh our memories maybe before each meeting. It could be a good reference guide to go back to.
We'll plan 3 meetings around the acceptance of bids instead of 2.
Oh, we could just plan the first one to be much longer.
I'm joking.
Did anyone else have questions? Ms. Duffy, I saw you took your computer off mute. Did you have a question?
She looks frozen, I think.
Oh, I think I was questioning about the pool exhaust system. That was is that part of the et cetera in that chart? That was another item that we ended up with an increased cost, right?
Yes, and that is one that was higher profile. We did talk about it. We should have included.
Right.
I apologize.
And I guess my question is, would it be helpful to everyone to have a list of those discussions that we had since the original approval that we did have separate meetings on? If we could have just a list and itemize what they were, I think that would be helpful and maybe raise people's comfort level and just having a grasp on, where the project stands right now.
Okay. One other thing, if for those of you who are pulling out binders and going back over materials over the last year or two, you're going to find that the schedule changed a little bit. We originally were not supposed to have this meeting till February. We were going to go out to bid in March. We moved all that back a month. I think I had mentioned this to folks. We did that because of COVID, because there have been some delays in shipping, which I'm sure everyone's aware of over the holidays, and obtaining materials. So we want the goal is to be able to get out to bid earlier in the season, in terms of other people going out to bid, but also in terms of procuring materials.
I guess I have a question regarding the process moving forward. Do we ever, so when we advertise and then we get the bids in, I see that we're saying we're starting construction, assuming all goes well and we approve everything, starting in April, right? Is that what that chart said, right? I'm just refresh my memory. That's what we said. So is the bids contingent on a company being able to start in April? That seems like a very quick turnaround for us to accept a bid and then, they show up with a bulldozer or what, so is that part of they don't put a proposal in unless they can start in April?
Absolutely. Steve, do you want to give some background on that?
Sure. Yeah. There's just to add one thing to the schedule change. Actually, the decision to put the stormwater management under Prevost Field influenced that as well, because that moved some work into the first summer that we were originally anticipating for the next summer. So that again was a big part of the lengthy conversations about that, and James and Bill and Hugh and everybody chiming in on the feasibility of that. So again, an implementation question, not a change that required approval, but how do we implement this design that's already been approved? But with regard to the procurement phase, right? So once contracts are signed, you're right. You're not necessarily going to see bulldozers show up the next week, because there's a procurement phase, there's shop drawings, there's all those elements and reviews that occur prior to the start. However, because we know, but to the second part of your question, yes, absolutely. The schedule is part of the construction documents. Time is of the essence to the contract in legal terms. And so that they are agreeing to staff the project and procure materials in a manner that allows them to meet the schedule.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Oh, Mr. Moore, yes.
Just a few quick questions. Whether it's for tonight or for 2 weeks from now, I think it'd be helpful if we got some kind of update on what's going on with the construction industry, both in terms of with COVID and economically. I know some of this will be answered only after we get bids back, but even moving into this, are materials easier to get, harder to get? Are firms, champing at the bit to build, or is it harder to get firms to want to come? So we'll see what happens in the bids, but any kind of preview for that would be helpful. Number two, this is probably more of a design question than a systems question, but could you remind me which sports and activities use Prevo Field now? And as part of this project, how adaptable the field is to other sports and other activities?
Sure.
And I know Mr. Friel's not here. He might be able to do more with some of that.
Yeah, the only other point that I would make is that some of the project, remember, involves replacing the bleachers or putting in proper bleachers along Enki. So the project does cover both of those fields.
Yes.
Mr. Batchelor, I can take a crack at it, but.
No, I did. So the question is, which sports use just Prevost Field? Is that what you're asking?
That's what I was thinking about now. And not to bury what I'm thinking. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, and we're making this substantial investment in this project. And I know that football and marching band use Prevo, but I've earlier in my career I worked on an NFL concussion lawsuit. What if football looks really different in 5 years or 10 years? So how much is this project that we want to last for 30 years going to serve our needs for that much time, and how much flexibility is built into the way we're designing it now for our fields?
I think there's flexibility built in, and I don't off the top of my head can tell which sports. Lacrosse has traditionally played on Enki. The boys soccer traditionally played on Enki, but then 2 years ago they started playing on Prevo and they started winning, and so then they got superstitious and liked it. And I honestly am not sure how that has played out in the last year or so. So there's been other sports that have been going on that as well. So there is a lot of youth sports. There are practices that go on. We have the track and field, winds up using the main Prevo area, stadium for track, and those events that surround track as well. Steve, what am I missing? There is a little bit of a division between, because we are lucky that we have Enki as well, but there's been some talk with once. You see, this is going to be the interesting piece, and this has been an ongoing dialogue. Once Prevo has the newer turf, whereas Enki has the newer turf right now, will more teams want to go back to, and will Enki be more practice? So both spaces are getting utilized differently and sometimes in the same way.
Right. Yeah. No. The stadium is designed for flexibility. You mentioned track and field. The D areas are presently grass. They're being changed to synthetic turf to aid in track and field events. It's designed with anticipation for football, soccer, and lacrosse. The netting that's occurring at around the end zones and partially up to about the 30-yard line, it has lacrosse practice in mind. The only other thing I'll speak to is the turf is not going to last 30 years. And a lot of the turf height, so to speak, has a lot to do with the preferences for which sports use it with the speed of play and so forth. So if next time you replace the turf, you can make changes then as to specifically, for example, if football moves somewhere else, you have those options when you replace the turf, which will not be 30 years, it'll be more like 10. So.
But I did not know that. Thank you. That's and it just that prompted just one other question. How much are these construction bids going to cover things like the look and feel of the campus and this part of the campus that we're renovating? Signage, colors, all of that kind of thing. Is that part of this construction document phase, construction bid phase, or is that something that's more of an operational thing that the school district starts to do once the project's complete? Is that within the scope of what we're doing here?
It's actually a little bit of both. Bill, maybe you want to speak to some of those conversations that are actually ongoing.
Well, yeah, that's exactly how I was going to put it. It's a little bit of both. So it's a great question. We're trying to incorporate what we can, but it is not, there is going to be a line of demarcation for certain things in this project, and that would go to signage too. So like campus-wide signage is something that we're discussing currently with the high school, with the AD, and some of that's getting wrapped up into this, but not all of it. And so that's something that we intend to do. And you know, if we, at the end of 18 months or 2 years, are wrapping this up, we'll have that figured out, but it's not necessarily in all of the specifications for the construction documents right now. Relabeling every section of the building on the outside, what colors might be used, but the things that are being addressed are specific to traffic and parking and things like that, that need to be specified within the project.
All right, that's very helpful. That's all the questions I had for now. Thanks to everyone for the presentation.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Thanks for all the feedback. I think we have some work to do, and we'll work on our communications going forward. Make sure that the board is getting the information that they need.
Yeah, I think this was actually really helpful. I think it's going to help the night of the 19th go smoothly, and it's all good. It's all good. So I'm going to move into public comment. Ms. Gangle, do we have any public comment?
Oh.
We have no public comment.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to read this. I'll read an abbreviated version. The board shall provide an opportunity at the beginning of each special board meeting for eligible participants to comment on matters related to the agenda, but you're saying we have no public comment tonight?
That is correct.
Okay. So should you be unable to attend tonight's meeting, you can submit your comment by email to boardcomments@rtsd.org or in writing to Mr. Michael Petiti, Radnor Township School District 135 South Wayne Avenue, Wayne, Pennsylvania 19087. Now we'll move into new business. Do we have any new business tonight? I can't see everybody. Hold on a second. Do we have any new business? Okay, seeing none. Then I will do board announcements. Our next round of board meetings, our committee meetings will be beginning next Tuesday at 5 p.m. We have policy, finance, and government relations and communications committee meetings, and they begin at 5 p.m. and they will be virtual. We have another curriculum committee meeting on Tuesday, January 19th, beginning at 5 p.m. That will be virtual. And then we do have our special board meeting of the whole to conduct the facilities committee meeting, where we'll take this issue of going out to bid. And that begins at 7 p.m. on January 19th. And then our regular business meeting will begin at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, January 26th in 2021 at 7 p.m. And that will also be virtual. All righty. So at this time, I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Motion from Ms. Goldman, a second from Ms. Dunn. All those in favor? And the motion passes unanimously. So we are adjourned. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. Good luck at the township.